Well, having done stunts on $6 Million Man for 4 years, I finally found something that wasn't bionic.
That's me.
And I'm really proud of her, and I'm glad that the people out there are.
At 87 years old, Lee Majors is finally saying her name again. Not in passing, not as a footnote to his career. As the woman he still can't quite explain away. Decades after the divorce, after 3 more marriages, after a lifetime of interviews, one name keeps surfacing whenever Lee Majors talks about love: Farrah Fawcett. So what actually happened between them, and why does he still sound haunted by it? The night he picked her out of a stack of photos. Before we get to Farrah, you need to understand who Lee Majors actually was before fame found him, because it explains a lot about the man he became in that marriage. Born in 1939 in Kentucky, Majors lost both of his parents before he was even 2 years old. He was raised by relatives and grew up with a serious love for football, playing all through his years at Eastern Kentucky State College. He had real hopes of going pro. Then a string of injuries to his shoulder, his knee, and his nose ended that dream before it ever started. Acting became the backup plan that turned into the main event. Here's the part almost nobody gets right. Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett didn't fall in love on a movie set, and they didn't meet at some glamorous premiere. It started with a stack of photographs and a lazy request. It was the late 1960s. Lee Majors was starring in The Big Valley, already a working actor with a reputation, and he needed a date for an industry event. His agent handed him photos of new clients the agency had just signed. Majors didn't ask about their resumes. He didn't ask about their acting range. He just told his agent, in his own words, to pick out the best-looking girl. That girl was a 21-year-old former beauty queen from Texas named Farrah Fawcett, fresh off the plane from the University of Texas, hoping to make it as a model. But the story doesn't stay charming for long. The first contact Farrah ever had with Lee Majors wasn't even a phone call. It was a message left on the answering machine of the all-girl boarding house where she was staying. The message was blunt, almost commanding. Tell her Lee Majors will be by at 8 o'clock to pick her up. No question mark. No, would you like to? Just an announcement. Farrah later admitted he was, in her words, the rudest man she'd ever encountered. And who could blame her? A total stranger sending word through a machine that he'd be arriving to collect her, like she was an appointment on his calendar. So why did she go anyway? Because Farrah realized something most women in Hollywood already knew. Lee Majors could have had his pick of any woman in town, and instead, he was going after the new girl who'd barely unpacked her bags. There was something flattering in that, even if the delivery was ice cold. Their first date wasn't smooth either. Farrah ordered a scotch and coke, something she wasn't used to drinking, and it made her sick. Majors later admitted he genuinely didn't know if she was actually ill or if she just couldn't stand being around him. He hedged his bets and sent her 13 yellow roses the next day. It worked. The two bonded over their shared southern roots, and from there, the romance moved fast. But if a rude answering machine message and a ruined first date were the beginning, how did this whirlwind end up at the altar? The wedding in the Bel Air garden. By 1973, Lee Majors and Farrah Fawcett were ready to make it official. On July 28th of that year, they married in a garden ceremony at the Bel Air Hotel. It was intimate by Hollywood standards. Lee's stepfather, Harvey Yeary, stood as his best man. Farrah's sister, Diane Walls, served as matron of honor. The bridal party wore custom outfits designed by Theodora Van Runkel, the costume designer later nominated for her work on Bonnie and Clyde and The Godfather Part 2. On paper, it looked like the perfect union of two rising stars. But there was already a quiet imbalance baked into the marriage, one that would only get louder with time. Even something as small as her name told you Farrah wasn't going to be a conventional Hollywood wife. She kept her surname hyphenated, going by Farrah Fawcett Majors throughout their marriage. At a time when most brides were expected to simply take their husband's name and disappear into it. It was a small act of independence, but a daring one for the era, and in hindsight, it was a preview of everything that was coming. Majors, by his own admission, had traditional expectations of what a wife should be. He wanted someone who would clean the house, cook his meals, and depend on him. Farrah went along with it at first. She has said she genuinely enjoyed cooking for him and keeping their home. She even had a nickname for him, Big Grump Head. But dependency was never going to be a permanent fit for a woman who was about to become one of the most photographed faces on the planet. That same year, Majors married Farrah. He also landed the role that would define his career, Colonel Steve Austin, in The $6 Million Man. The show became a massive hit almost overnight. And here's the detail most fans don't know. Farrah actually appeared in 4 episodes of her husband's show. For a moment, it looked like 2 careers rising in lockstep, feeding off each other's momentum. So if they were rising together, what pulled them apart? The poster that changed everything. In 1976, Farrah landed the role that would turn her into a global phenomenon, Jill Monroe on Charlie's Angels. And here's a detail that adds a strange twist to the whole story. According to Majors himself, he was the one who picked out the now legendary red swimsuit poster that made Farrah a household name. He told People magazine directly, "I picked out the poster, the famous one. I picked out the picture. You probably don't know why. That's the biggest selling poster ever." Think about that for a second. The image that turned his wife into an international beauty icon, the poster that sold 12 million copies, the Farrah Do hairstyle that got copied in salons everywhere. All of it happened because Lee Majors made a choice. He helped build the very fame that would eventually pull his marriage apart. Industry insiders at the time even had a name for the genre Charlie's Angels belonged to. NBC executive Paul Klein coined the term jiggle television as a jab at the kind of glossy, star-driven dramas ABC was putting out under network chief Fred Silverman. It was meant as an insult, but shows like Charlie's Angels ended up defining an entire era of television, and Farrah was its breakout face. Charlie's Angels became the runaway hit of the 1976 to 77 television season. Farrah's rise was no longer gradual. It was explosive, and explosive fame, especially for a woman in that era, brought a very specific kind of pressure and a wave of independence that clashed hard with the dependent wife role Majors had wanted at the start. Farrah later said it plainly. When she married Majors, she was a compliant person who wanted nothing more than to cook, clean, and depend on her husband. She still liked doing those things, she admitted, but she could no longer be dependent. Not anymore. Not with her own name lighting up marquees. But how does a marriage survive when only one half of it is expanding while the other watches from the sidelines? 2 weeks a year. This is the line that Lee Majors has repeated in nearly every interview he's given about Farrah, almost word for word, decades apart. "I ended up seeing her 2 weeks in 1 year," he said. "She was off doing films and stuff, and doing her series, and I was doing mine. That's mainly the reason we got divorced. We never saw each other. 2 weeks out of an entire year." That's the number Majors keeps coming back to, as if it's the one statistic that explains everything that went wrong. Both of them were working brutal schedules, 14-hour days, according to Majors, with barely any overlap in their calendars. Add to that a press environment that gave them zero privacy. Majors has described being constantly hunted by paparazzi during those years, saying, "The photographers always managed to find out exactly where they were." There was no version of 1970s fame that came with a break from the cameras. Farrah eventually left Charlie's Angels after only 1 season to pursue film roles, a move that triggered a lawsuit over her contract. Meanwhile, the films Majors made after The $6 Million Man weren't landing commercially the way his television work had. Their careers, once climbing together, were now moving in completely different directions and at completely different speeds. Majors has also talked candidly, years later, about just how invasive the press attention got during those years. "It was very quick, and it lasted about almost 12 years, he told Fox News. Looking back on the marriage as a whole, "This business is tough. Working 14 hours a day, both of you, and the days went by. He's also described the paparazzi presence as relentless, saying there was no way to plan a private outing because photographers always seemed to know exactly where the couple would be. By 1979, the couple had separated. The divorce was finalized 3 years later, in 1982. 12 years after that garden ceremony at the Bel Air Hotel, it was over. So does that mean it ended in bitterness? Not exactly. And that's where the story gets more complicated than most people assume. A long silence, then a reaching out. After the divorce, Farrah moved into a long on-and-off relationship with actor Ryan O'Neal, someone who had once been in Major's circle of friends. The two exes largely lost touch after that. Their marriage had produced no children, and without that tie holding them together, they simply drifted into separate lives. To understand just how much of a pattern this was for Majors, it helps to look at his marriage history as a whole. Farrah wasn't his first marriage, and she wasn't his last. Long before Hollywood knew his name, Majors married Kathy Robinson back in 1961, and the two welcomed a son, Lee Majors II, in 1962. That marriage ended in divorce by 1965, undone by the same mix of financial pressure and conflicting schedules that would echo through his marriage to Farrah more than a decade later. In between, he also dated actress Patty Chandler and was briefly married to actress Mary Ann Mobley. Farrah was his fourth wife, not his first, which tells you something important. The 2-weeks-a-year problem wasn't unique to their relationship. It was a pattern that followed Majors through most of his career. Majors went on to marry twice more after Farrah. He wed Karen Velez in 1988, a marriage that lasted until 1994. Then, in 2002, he married Faith Cross, the woman he remains with to this day, a union Majors has since called a record by Hollywood standards. But somewhere in the middle of all that moving forward, something happened that pulled Majors back toward his first wife of fame. In 2006, Farrah was diagnosed with cancer, and according to reports at the time, Majors tried to reach out to her, working through mutual friends to make contact after years of near-total silence. Why would a man who had built an entirely new life suddenly go looking for a way back into hers? The phone call on her 62nd birthday. In 2009, Lee Majors picked up the phone and called his ex-wife to wish her a happy 62nd birthday. What followed wasn't a quick, polite exchange. According to an insider close to the situation, the two of them talked for 40 minutes straight, covering her life, her illness, old memories. They joked with each other. They got emotional. At one point, they even talked about the idea of working together again someday. For two people who had spent decades mostly out of each other's orbit, that conversation reads like a kind of unfinished business, finally getting addressed, even if neither of them knew just how little time was left. There was no public attempt to rewrite the past or pretend the marriage had been perfect. Instead, it sounded like two people acknowledging the chapter they had shared, setting aside old disappointments long enough to remember the affection that had existed before fame, distance, and time pulled them apart. Farrah Fawcett died 4 months later, on June 25, 2009, after a long and public battle with cancer. She was 62 years old. So what does a man say publicly when the woman who once wore his name, the woman whose career he helped launch with a single poster choice, is suddenly gone? She was one of a kind. When news of Farrah's death broke, Major's representative released a statement on his behalf. It read, "Lee and his wife Faith were saddened by the news. She fought a tremendous battle against a terrible disease." A short, respectful statement, offered alongside his current wife's name, acknowledging the loss without turning it into a spectacle. In the years since, whenever Majors has been asked to reflect on Farrah, the tone has stayed remarkably consistent. He has called her one of a kind. He has said he was always, in his words, 110% behind her and proud of her. And in one particularly candid moment with the Daily Mail, he summed up their entire cultural moment with a single comparison. "People tell me we were the Brad and Angelina of our time. Sadly, that didn't work out too good either." There's something almost disarming about that quote. No bitterness in it, no score settling, just a man in his 80s looking back at the woman he was married to for 12 years, still measuring their relationship against the biggest celebrity couple of a later generation, and still coming up a little wistful about how it ended. Around the time of an ABC television special revisiting Farrah's life and legacy, Majors gave another round of interviews reflecting on those years, and the special itself reportedly placed ABC among the top-performing networks the night it aired, a sign of just how much interest still surrounds her story more than a decade after her death. Majors has also pointed to his current marriage as proof of how far he's come since those early chaotic years of fame. Speaking about his lasting relationship with Faith, he said simply, "It is a record in Hollywood," a quiet nod to just how rare it is for anyone in his industry to make a marriage stick for over 2 decades. Majors has been candid about the toll fame took on their marriage, about the paparazzi, about a schedule that reduced 2 young stars to 2 weeks together a year. But he has never once, in any verified interview, framed Farrah as a villain in that story. If anything, the picture that emerges from his own words is a man who understands exactly why it fell apart, and who still holds real affection for the woman at the center of it. So after everything, the whirlwind courtship, the garden wedding, the poster that made her famous, the years of separate lives, and finally, that 40-minute phone call before the end, what's actually left of the story? The takeaway. At 87, Lee Majors isn't rewriting history, and he isn't chasing headlines. He's simply telling the same story he's told for years, the one where a rude answering machine message turned into a marriage, where fame pulled 2 people in opposite directions, and where, despite everything, a phone call on a birthday gave them both something close to closure before it was too late. Farrah Fawcett has been gone for over 15 years now. Lee Majors has been married to Faith for over 2 decades, and yet her name still comes up, unprompted, every time someone asks him about love. Maybe that's the real answer to the question this video started with. He never forgot her, not because their marriage was perfect, but because for 12 complicated years, she was the one measuring stick every relationship afterward got compared to. It's worth remembering that Majors has lived through 4 marriages, a legendary television career, and a decade spent almost entirely out of the spotlight by his own choice, during which he said he was free to travel the world and was still recognized by total strangers wherever he went. Of everything he built and everyone he loved along the way, it's still Farrah's name that surfaces first when the cameras start rolling and the questions turn personal. Not his football injuries, not the bionic television empire he helped build, just a rude answering machine message, a swimsuit poster he picked out himself, and a 40-minute phone call on a birthday that turned out to be her last. 2 people who once sat 2 weeks a year in each other's company, who spent decades apart afterward, still found their way back to one honest conversation before it was too late. That's rare in Hollywood, and it's rarer still that the man behind it is willing to keep talking about it, unprompted, at 87 years old. If you want more real stories behind the stars you grew up watching, stories built on what these people have actually said in their own words, make sure you're subscribed, because this channel is just getting started.